Okay, lessons 71 and 72 talk again about factoring. So we already talked about factoring trinomials. Now this one looks a little bit different. We want it to, when we factor out a trinomial, we want the first term to be an x squared, the second one to have just an x, and the third one to have just a number. But we can see that this is not set up that way. So before we could do our parentheses when we factor this trinomial, we have to first factor out an x. This x cubed has an extra x in it. This x squared has an x, and this one has an x. So we're going to take and factor out the x's in each of these three terms. So first we do that. If it's like the opposite of the distributive property. So if we divide an x out of x cubed, we are left with x squared. Watching the signs, we're going to go ahead and put a plus. We're going to factor out an x from here out of that x cubed. That leaves us with just 6x. We're going to factor out the x in this last one, which leaves us with just 5. So if you did the distributive property, you would say x times x squared, which would give you x cubed, x times 6x gives you 6x squared, and x times 5 gives you 5x. So these two expressions are equal. Now we can factor this, but we have to keep in mind, so when we factored the trinomials in lesson 69, we ended up with just two terms, just two things in parentheses, like this. When we factored out x squared minus 5x plus 6, we had two terms in parentheses. But now we have this extra x. So these trinomials with this extra x have three factors. So we have to remember to keep that one as well. So if we are factoring this, we keep the x, and now we can move on to our parentheses. Now we can factor this part. Two numbers when multiplied together that equal 5, when added together equals 6. So that would be x plus 5 and x plus 1, because 5 times 1 equals 5, and 5 plus 1 equals 6. So the answer to the problem that says to factor x cubed plus 6x squared plus 5x is this. It's x times x plus 5 times x plus 1. Don't forget to keep that x in your answer because it is one of the factors. This type of trinomial has three factors. Okay, so there's another thing that comes up when you're factoring these trinomials. Something like this. If we have negative 3x cubed minus 6x squared plus 72x. Not only do we notice that this x is cubed when we want it to be squared, and this x is squared when we want it to just be x, and this has an extra x. We notice those things right away. So we do need to factor out one of the x's. But there's something else to keep in mind. We do not want a negative sign in front of our first term. It's okay if it's in front of our second and third term, but we don't want a negative sign here in the front. So we have to factor out that negative sign. That negative sign stands for -1. So we have to factor out both an x and a -1. So to do that, we can take and remove, we can factor out a negative x. Actually, we need to take out the negative sign, but we also need to take out this 3. So we're going to take out a negative x, but we also don't want a coefficient. That's just the number in front of the variable. The coefficient of x cubed is -3. So for our very first term, we don't want a negative sign and we don't want a coefficient. So we have to factor that out. So we also, not only do we have to factor out a negative x, but we also have to factor out a 3. So what we're going to take out of each of these three terms is a -3x. That will leave us with just an x squared first, which is what we need. So we're going to write -3x right here. It's doing the opposite of the distributive property. If we factor out -3x from -3x squared, that leaves us with just x squared, which is what we want. I'm sorry, I meant to say 3x cubed. Because -3x times x squared equals -3x cubed. Now we look at this term, negative 6x squared. We need to factor out negative 3x. So what multiplied by negative 3x gives us negative 6x squared? No, it's a positive 2x, because 2x times negative 3x equals negative 6x squared, which is what we were looking for. Now we have this last term, 72x. We need to take negative 3x out of there. So 3 goes into 72. How many times? It goes in 24 times. So we're going to end up having a negative 24. And then we can close our parentheses, because negative 24 times negative 3x gives us a positive 72x, which is what we were trying to get. Okay, so this term right here and this expression right here, these are both equal. We just did the opposite of the distributive property and took out 3x, because we were looking to make a trinomial that has x squared first. There's no negative sign in front of it, and there's no coefficient. There is no number. So now we can, when we get that to that point, then we can do our parentheses trick. Okay, so we're going to keep the negative 3x, because that is one of the factors. This trinomial is going to have 3 factors. Negative 3x. Now we're going to put an x in both. Now we're looking for 2 numbers when multiplied together give us negative 24, and when added together give us 2. So those 2 numbers would be negative 6 and 4, because negative 6 times 4 equals negative 24. Remember to watch those signs, guys. But when added together, you know what? I did this wrong, because when added together, negative 6 plus 4 gives us negative 2, but we need a positive 2. So now we can see that we need to switch the negative sign. We need to make it 6 times negative 4. So that would be negative 24, which it still gives us negative 24, which is good. But when you add 6 plus negative 4, that gives us 2, which is what we were looking for. So we need to put a plus 6 and a minus 4 in our parentheses. So the answer, if they ask you to factor this trinomial right here, the answer to it would be negative 3x times x plus 6 times x minus 4. 3 factors. There's one other type of factoring that is talked about briefly in lesson 72. And that's when you're factoring out sums. So I'm going to turn to lesson 72 and show you an example about that. So this is factors that are sums. And this is in lesson 72. Okay, the first one that they're talking about looks like this. A plus b in parentheses times x squared minus a plus b times x minus 6 times a plus b. And they're asking you to factor this. It's kind of similar to what we just did. We want to get just the x squared by itself with no coefficient. Right now, the x squared has this as a coefficient, and it is a sum in parentheses. And if we look, this a plus b is found in each of these 3 terms in this trinomial. So we're going to factor that out, do the opposite of the distributive property. So we're going to put a plus b first, and then we are going to put in parentheses our trinomial that we can factor. So if we take a plus b and factor that out of a plus b times x squared, we're left with just x squared. We're going to take a plus b out of this term. We're going to divide a plus b times x by a plus b. So that just leaves us with minus x. We're going to take the a plus b out of there, and that leaves us with minus 6. Kind of made the parentheses too long there. Okay, so if we did the distributive property and went through and multiplied that a plus b, we would find that this expression is the same as this one. Now we can factor this like we have done already. So we're going to keep the a plus b. That's important. That is still a factor. And now we're going to look at this and do our parentheses trick. we need to find two numbers when multiplied together equal -6 and when added together equals -x. So I believe that would be -2 and 3. The -2 times 3 equals -6, but -2, I did it wrong again, -2 plus 3 actually equals 1, but we want a -1. You have to look at this sign, we want a -1. So it's going to actually be 3 and -2. So that's what will happen when you work these problems. You just try some of the two factors in here and see if it works. And if it doesn't, then you make adjustments. So 3 times -2 equals -6, but 3 plus -2. I did the exact same thing, didn't I? We want -3 and +2. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, -3 times 2 equals -6, and -3 plus 2 equals -1, which is finally the ones that we're looking for. So we need to make x minus 3 and x plus 2. So the answer when they ask you to factor this becomes this, 3 factors.